The throne room of the Velthari Dominion stretched for nearly a mile. Golden pillars rose toward a ceiling painted with the images of conquered worlds. Each pillar represented a civilization that had bent its knee to the Dominion's power. There were hundreds of them. Sho in Thesan sat upon his throne of black crystal and watched the holographic display floating before him. His advisors stood in a half-circle around him, their scaled faces showing various degrees of boredom. This was a routine meeting about a routine matter. A new species had been discovered on the edge of explored space. "They call themselves humans," said Military Commander Voss, waving his clawed hand through the hologram. The image shifted to show a strange creature. It stood on two legs like the Velthari, but that was where the similarities ended. It had no scales to protect its soft pink skin, no claws on its blunt fingers, no fangs in its flat mouth. It looked fragile, like something that might break if you touched it too hard. Rchon. Thesan laughed. The sound echoed through the massive chamber. "This is what you bring before me? This soft little thing? They have recently discovered faster-than-light travel, my lord," Voss continued. "They have established colonies on 17 worlds. Their homeworld is called Earth. Our scouts report a population of approximately 12 billion on the homeworld alone. 12 billion workers for our mines," the Archon said with a cruel smile. "How fortunate. Send a subjugation fleet. Standard protocol. They will kneel or they will burn. My lord, if I may speak." The voice came from the back of the chamber. The advisors turned to see who dared interrupt the Archon. An old Velthari stepped forward. His scales had faded to a dull gray, and he walked with the help of a staff. This was Kelvis, the keeper of ancient records. The historian Archon Thesan said with barely hidden contempt, "What wisdom does our library keeper wish to share?" Kelvis bowed slowly. "I have been studying the precursor texts, my lord. The ones left behind by the civilization that ruled this galaxy before any of our species existed. They left warnings about certain kinds of species that should never be provoked. Warnings about soft-skinned creatures with no natural weapons." The Archon laughed again. "Please, old one, enlighten us." "The precursors called it the doctrine of sleeping giants," Kelvis said. His voice was steady, despite the mockery in the Archon's tone. "They wrote that some species appear weak, but carry within them a fire that cannot be extinguished. They describe specific traits to watch for. Persistence predators who hunt by following prey until it dies of exhaustion. Creatures who form bonds with apex predators and treat them as family. Species that consume poisons for pleasure. And most importantly, species that possess an emotion the precursors had no word for. And what emotion is that? The closest translation would be spite, my lord. The willingness to harm oneself in order to harm an enemy. The precursors wrote that such species would burn their own homes to ashes just to ensure their enemy burned with them." The throne room fell silent for a moment. Then the Archon waved his hand dismissively. "Superstition and myth. The precursors have been dead for 1,000,000 years. Their warnings are nothing but dust. Commander Voss, send the subjugation fleet. I want this species kneeling before me within 30 cycles." Kelvis opened his mouth to protest, but a sharp look from the military commander silenced him. The old historian bowed and retreated to the shadows. He had delivered his warning. What happened next was not his responsibility. 20 cycles later, the Velthari subjugation fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel above a human colony world. The planet was called Proxima Haven, and it was home to 3 million humans. The fleet consisted of 50 warships, more than enough to crush a young species that had only been traveling between stars for a few generations. Admiral Kreth stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the blue and green world below. It reminded him of other worlds he had conquered. They always looked peaceful from orbit. They always looked peaceful until the bombardment began. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. "Standard subjugation message." The communication officer nodded and began the broadcast. The message was simple and had been delivered to hundreds of species before. Surrender unconditionally. Accept Velthari rule. Provide workers and resources to the Dominion. Resistance would be met with orbital bombardment. The response came faster than expected. A human face appeared on the view screen. It was a female, Admiral Kreth noted, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that seemed to hold no fear. She wore a military uniform with symbols he did not recognize. "I am Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Defense Force," she said. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. "You have entered human space without permission. You have threatened a human colony with violence. I am authorized to give you one opportunity to correct this mistake." Admiral Kreth felt his scales rise in amusement. This tiny creature was giving him an opportunity? He had destroyed civilizations older than humanity's recorded history. "You have 24 hours to leave our space," Admiral Tanaka continued. "This is your only warning." The view screen went dark. Admiral Kreth turned to his officers. They were all struggling to contain their laughter. A species that had been traveling between stars for less than a century was threatening the Velthari Dominion. It was absurd. It was insulting. "Begin orbital bombardment," Admiral Kreth commanded. "Target their military installations first, then their cities. Perhaps when 1,000,000 of them are dead, they will learn respect." The weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, should we not wait for their response to the subjugation offer?" "Standard protocol requires I am changing the protocol," Admiral Kreth snapped. "These creatures dared to threaten the Dominion. They will learn the cost of such arrogance. Fire." The fleet opened fire. Energy beams lanced down toward the planet's surface. Defense satellites exploded. Military bases vanished in balls of fire. Admiral Kreth watched the destruction with satisfaction. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled. The weak served. Humanity would learn this lesson like every other species before them. Then the lights on the bridge flickered. Admiral Kreth frowned. "What was that?" Before anyone could answer, the lights went out completely. Emergency power activated, bathing the bridge in red light. Alarms began to wail throughout the ship. "Report." Admiral Kreth shouted. "Sir, we have lost contact with the rest of the fleet," the communication officer said, her voice shaking. "All channels are silent." "That is impossible." "Check the equipment." "I have, sir." "The equipment is functioning. They are simply not responding." "Any of them." Admiral Kreth moved to the viewport. He could see the other ships of his fleet hanging in space around him. Their lights were dark. Their weapons had stopped firing. They were completely still, like dead things floating in the void. Then his own ship shuddered. And Admiral Kreth felt something he had not felt in over 100 years of warfare. He felt afraid. 6 hours later, every channel in the Velthari Dominion received the same message. The entire subjugation fleet had gone silent. No distress signals, no debris, no explanation, just silence. Archon Thiessen refused to believe the reports. He threw the data tablet across his throne room and watched it shatter against one of the golden pillars. His advisors stood in terrified silence as he raged. 50 warships do not simply vanish. He roared. This is some kind of trick. A failure in our communication systems? Send another fleet. A larger one. Find out what happened. Military Commander Voss bowed low. My lord, should we not first investigate? I gave you an order, Commander. Send the fleet. 10 times larger than before? 500 warships? If these humans have somehow developed a weapon capable of disabling our ships, we will overwhelm them with numbers. We will crush them so completely that no species will ever dare challenge us again. The second fleet launched 3 cycles later. 500 of the Dominion's finest warships, crewed by veterans of dozens of conquests. They traveled through the darkness between stars with weapons charged and crews ready for battle. When they dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Proxima Haven, they expected to find wreckage. They expected to find debris fields and evidence of whatever weapon the humans had used. What they found was something far worse. The colony world hung peaceful and blue in the void. Its cities were intact. Its people moved through their daily lives as if nothing had happened. There was no sign of battle, no evidence of destruction, but floating in orbit around the planet were 50 Velthari warships. Every ship from the First Fleet, They were perfectly preserved, without a single mark of damage on their hulls. Their lights were dark. Their engines were cold. They drifted like ghost ships in the silence of space. Vice Admiral Then ordered his crews to board the vessels. What they found made hardened warriors vomit and flee back to their own ships. The ghost ships were completely empty. Not a single body remained. No blood, no signs of struggle. The crews had simply vanished. 12,000 Velthari soldiers, gone without a trace. But that was not the worst part. Written across the hull of the flagship, in letters 100 meters tall, was a message. It was written in the Velthari language, in the formal script used only by the royal court. Someone had wanted to make sure the message would be understood clearly. It said, "We asked nicely. We won't ask." Again, Vice Admiral Then immediately ordered a retreat. His fleet returned to Velthari space at maximum speed. When he delivered his report to the Archon, he did not try to hide his fear. He spoke of the ghost ships. He spoke of the missing crews. He spoke of the message that seemed to mock the Dominion's power. Archon Thesan listened in cold silence. When the Vice Admiral finished, the Archon turned to Kelvis, who stood in his usual place in the shadows. "You spoke of precursor warnings," the Archon said. His voice was quiet now, controlled. "Tell me everything," the old historian stepped forward. He had spent the days since the First Fleet's disappearance buried in the ancient archives. What he had found had stolen his sleep and filled his dreams with nightmares. "The precursors encountered humanity's ancestors long ago," Kelvis began. "They observed them from afar, as they observed many primitive species. What they saw disturbed them greatly." He activated a holographic display. Images appeared of the human homeworld, Earth, as it had been thousands of years ago. "Humans evolved on a death world," Kelvis continued. "Their planet was filled with predators, diseases, natural disasters, and extreme climate variations. Most species would have been destroyed by such conditions. Humans thrived. They adapted. They overcame." The images shifted to show early humans hunting massive creatures across vast plains. "They are persistence predators, my lord. They do not run faster than their prey, but they do not need to. They simply follow. They walk and walk and walk, never stopping, never resting, until their prey collapses from exhaustion. Then they move in for the kill. They can maintain pursuit for days if necessary." The Archon's scales shifted uncomfortably. The Velthari were ambush predators. The idea of being followed relentlessly until exhaustion claimed them was deeply unsettling. "But their physical traits are not what makes them dangerous," Kelvis said. "It is their minds." The precursors identified several psychological traits that appear in no other known species. First, humans bond with anything. They form emotional attachments to animals, to machines, to abstract concepts. They will fight and die for things that cannot benefit them. "That is foolishness," the Archon muttered. "But consider what it means. A human will sacrifice their own life to save a stranger. They will charge into certain death to protect something they love. They cannot be intimidated by threats to their own well-being because they value other things more than their own survival." The holographic display changed again. It showed humans consuming various substances. They drink poisons for pleasure. Substances that would kill most species are consumed. Recreationally, alcohol, capsaicin, caffeine, their bodies are designed to process toxins that would destroy other creatures. "And the emotion you mentioned?" the Archon asked. "The spite?" Kelvis nodded slowly. "Spite is perhaps the most dangerous thing about humanity. It is the willingness to accept harm to oneself in order to inflict greater harm on an enemy. Other species calculate cost and benefit. They retreat when the price of victory becomes too high. Humans do not think this way. If they believe they have been wronged, they will pursue revenge, even if it destroys them in the process." The old historian paused. His next words were spoken quietly, as if he feared the universe itself might hear. "The precursors believed that humans would rather see everything burn than accept defeat. They would crash their own ships into enemy fleets. They would destroy their own cities to deny them to an enemy. They would end their own civilization if it meant taking their enemy with them. The throne room was silent. Even the Archon seemed affected by the historian's words. Then Thesson straightened on his throne. His eyes hardened. Fear was being replaced by anger. "These are just words," he said. "Stories told by a dead civilization. We are the Velthari Dominion. We have ruled this region of space for 12,000 years. We have crushed empires far older than humanity's entire existence. I will not be frightened by ghost stories." He stood and pointed at his military commanders. "Mobilize the Crimson Tide, all of it. 3,000 warships. Every soldier we have. We will go to human space not as conquerors, but as we will burn every one of their worlds to ash. We will ensure that not a single human survives to threaten us again." As the commanders rushed to obey, a sensor officer called out an alarm. "My lord, long-range sensors have detected something emerging from human space." "A fleet?" "No, my lord." The officer's voice shook. "A single ship, very small, and it is heading directly for our homeworld." Archon Thiessen stared at the sensor display. One ship, just one, and it was coming straight for him in the shadows. Kelvis closed his eyes and began to pray to gods he had stopped believing in long ago. The human ship was tiny. It was barely larger than a Velthari shuttle, painted in simple gray with no visible weapons. It moved through the heart of Velthari space without fear, passing defense stations and patrol fleets that could have destroyed it in seconds, but none of them fired. The Archon had given orders to let it pass. He wanted to see what the humans would do. He wanted to understand his enemy before he destroyed them. The ship landed in the capital city, in a plaza reserved for foreign diplomats. Thousands of Velthari soldiers surrounded the landing pad, their weapons trained on the vessel. Millions more watched through broadcast screens across the planet. This was the first time most of them had ever seen a human. The ship's door opened, and a single figure stepped out. Captain Elena Vance was not what the Velthari expected. She was small by human standards, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. She wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations. She carried no visible weapons. She looked like nothing special at all, but she walked through the ranks of armed soldiers without a trace of fear. Her steps were steady. Her eyes were forward. She moved like someone taking a stroll through a garden, not walking into the heart of an empire that wanted her species dead. The Archon received her in his throne room. He had considered meeting her in a smaller chamber, something more appropriate for such an insignificant visitor. But he wanted her to see the pillars. He wanted her to count them and understand how many. Civilizations had knelt before him. Alina walked the length of the great hall. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. When she reached the throne, she did not bow. She did not kneel. She simply stood and looked up at the Archon with those calm gray eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Archon," Thiessen said. "Coming here alone." "I am neither," Alina replied. Her voice was pleasant, almost friendly. "I am simply practical. We need to talk, and I am good at talking. Talk." The Archon laughed. "Your species attacked my fleet. You kidnapped 12,000 of my soldiers. You threatened my empire. What is there to talk about? Your fleet attacked our colony first. Your soldiers tried to murder 3 million innocent people. We defended ourselves." Lena tilted her head slightly. "But you are right. There is much to discuss. That is why I am here. To deliver humanity's terms." A murmur went through the assembled advisors and guards. The Archon's eyes narrowed. This tiny creature was delivering terms. "To him, I am listening," he said coldly. "Entertain me." Alina nodded. "First, the Velthari Dominion will release all species currently held under its rule. Every conquered world will be granted independence. Your empire has spent 12,000 years taking what does not belong to you. That ends now. Impossible. Second, you will pay reparations to every species you have harmed. The exact amounts will be determined by an independent council. This will not be negotiable. Absurd. Third, you will dismantle your military. You may keep a small defense force, but the Crimson Tide will be dissolved. Your warships will be decommissioned. You are insane. Fourth and finally, you will publicly apologize to the people of Proxima Haven. You will admit that your attack was unprovoked aggression. You will ask for their forgiveness. The throne room erupted. Advisors shouted in outrage. Soldiers raised their weapons. The Archon rose from his throne, his scales flushed dark with fury. You dare? He roared. You come into my throne room. You stand before my throne, and you dare to make demands of me. I have crushed empires that existed before your species learned to walk upright. I have destroyed civilizations that made your greatest achievements look like children's toys. And you, a single weak creature from a weak species, think you can threaten me? Alina did not move. Her expression did not change. She waited for the shouting to stop, then spoke again in the same calm voice. I am not threatening you, Archon. I am offering you a choice. These are humanity's terms for peace. If you accept them, no more blood needs to be spilled. We can end this conflict today. And if I refuse, then what happens next is your responsibility, not ours. The Archon stepped down from his throne. He walked toward Alina until he stood directly in front of her, towering over her small form. His guards moved closer, ready to act on any command. I refuse, he said, and I order your execution. Your body will be sent back to your people as a message. Alina smiled. It was a small smile, almost sad. We hoped you would say that. The Archon frowned. You hoped I would order your death? We hoped you would refuse peace. We wanted to offer mercy first, you see. Humanity always offers mercy first. It is important to us. We needed to know that we gave you every chance to avoid what comes next. What comes next is your death and the destruction of your species. No. Alina reached for her wrist and pressed a small button on her communicator. What comes next is justice. Nothing seemed to happen. The Archon looked around, confused. Then his communication officer rushed forward, his face pale with shock. My lord, we are receiving reports from across the Empire. Uprisings have begun on every conquered world. Simultaneously, our communication networks are failing. Our power grids are collapsing. It is happening everywhere at once. The Archon stared at Alina. What have you done? We have been preparing for this moment for a long time, Alina said. Did you really think the ship that destroyed your first fleet was our first contact with your empire? We have had operatives on your conquered worlds for months, working with resistance movements, sharing technology, building networks. We were never going to simply fight your fleets in space. That would cost too many lives on both sides. Instead, we have been cutting the roots of your empire. And now, at this moment, every conquered species is rising up together. The Archon grabbed Alina by the throat. His claws pressed against her soft skin. I will kill you. Kill me, Alina said, her voice strained but still calm. It will not change anything. This is bigger than me. This is bigger than you. This is every species you have ever wronged, finally given the chance to fight back. And they are not alone. Humanity stands with them. The Archon threw her to the ground. He turned to his commanders. Send the Crimson Tide. All of it. Now, crush these uprisings. Burn these worlds if you have to. The soldiers rushed to obey. Alina rose to her feet. Her neck was bruised, but her eyes still held that strange calm. You still do not understand, she said quietly. We are not afraid of your fleet. We have been waiting for you to send it. Every ship you send to crush rebellions is a ship that is not protecting your homeworld. And while your empire burns around you, humanity's true fleet is coming. She looked toward the great windows of the throne room, toward the stars beyond. Mercy has been rejected. Now comes the reckoning. The Crimson Tide split into 100 smaller fleets and scattered across the Dominion. Every conquered world needed to be brought back under control. Every rebellion needed to be crushed. But as the fleets arrived at their destinations, they discovered that the uprisings were far worse than the initial reports suggested. On Vurex Prime, the Velthari garrison found their own weapons turned against them. Human engineers had taught the resistance how to hack Velthari security systems. Soldiers emerged from their barracks to find their vehicles disabled,
Oh.
their communications jammed, and their weapon systems locked. They were captured without a single shot being fired. On the mining world of Kelax, workers who had been slaves for generations rose up in perfect coordination. They sealed the tunnels, trapped the overseers underground, and took control of the orbital stations. When Velthari ships arrived to retake the planet, they found the entire system's defense grid had been reprogrammed. The slaves now controlled weapons that could destroy fleets. On a dozen other worlds, similar scenes played out. The resistance movements were organized, equipped, and trained. They fought not like desperate rebels, but like professional soldiers. Every action was coordinated. Every attack targeted critical infrastructure. The Dominion's control was crumbling faster than the Crimson Tide could respond, and then humanity's fleet arrived. Admiral Yuki Tanaka led the main force from the bridge of her flagship, the U.S. Horizon. 200 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Velthari core space. It was a small number compared to the Crimson Tide's 3,000 vessels. But as the Velthari would soon learn, numbers were not everything. The first engagement took place above the fortress world of Desser. A Velthari defense fleet of 80 ships moved to intercept the human advance force of 20 vessels. The Velthari commanders were confident. They had 4-1 superiority. They had the advantage of defensive positions. Victory seemed certain. The battle lasted 6 minutes. Human ships moved in ways the Velthari had never seen. They performed maneuvers that should have torn them apart, spinning and diving and reversing course at speeds that would have killed any Velthari crew. But human pilots laughed as they pushed their ships to the limit. They whooped and cheered as they dodged enemy fire by margins of meters. They sang old battle songs from Earth's history as they charged into the heart of the enemy formation. The Velthari could not understand it. Their tactical computers predicted human casualties with each reckless maneuver. They expected the humans to break off, to retreat, to preserve their lives. Instead, the humans pressed harder. They took risks that made no logical sense, and somehow, impossibly, those risks paid off. When the battle ended, 63 Velthari ships had been destroyed or disabled. Human losses for ships. With all crews successfully evacuated before destruction, reports of the defeat spread through the Velthari military. For the first time in 12,000 years, fear began to take hold. Not fear of human weapons or human numbers, but fear of human minds. These creatures did not fight like any species the Velthari had ever encountered. They seemed to welcome danger. They seemed to find joy in the chaos of battle. Admiral Tanaka pushed deeper into Velthari space. More engagements followed. Each one ended the same way. Human ships would engage forces many times their size, absorb incredible punishment, and emerge victorious through a combination of skill, courage, and what the Velthari could only describe as madness in one battle. A human destroyer deliberately rammed a Velthari carrier to prevent it from launching fighters that would have threatened a refugee convoy. The destroyer's crew evacuated seconds before impact, picked up by a passing human frigate that had diverted from its own mission specifically to save them. The carrier was destroyed. The refugees escaped. And the crew of the destroyer was back in action aboard a new ship within 2 days. The Velthari had no framework for understanding such behavior. Their military doctrine was built on calculation, acceptable losses, strategic value, cost-benefit analysis. The humans seemed to operate on an entirely different system. They would sacrifice their own ships to protect aliens they had never met. They would risk their lives for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. They would accept certain death if it meant achieving a goal they considered important. Archon. Thiessen watched the reports from his throne room with growing desperation. He had recalled the fragments of the Crimson Tide, pulling ships back from the rebellions to defend the core worlds. But it was not enough. The uprisings continued to spread. Human special forces appeared on world after world, supporting the resistance, destroying key facilities, freeing prisoners, and always. Admiral Tanaka's fleet drew closer to the Velthari homeworld. The final battle for Velthry. Space began in the orbit of the gas giant Korvax, 2 systems away from the homeworld. The remaining Crimson Tide, nearly 1,000 ships, made its stand. The humans had assembled their full force, 200 warships, supported by converted civilian vessels carrying supplies and reinforcements. The Velthry outnumbered the humans 5-1. Their commanders believed this would finally be the turning point. Even humans could not overcome such odds. They were wrong. The battle lasted 3 days. Human ships fought without rest, crews rotating through shifts while their vessels continued to engage. When ammunition ran low, human ships moved to resupply while others covered them. When ships were damaged, repair crews worked under fire to restore critical systems. When captains fell, lieutenants took their place without hesitation. On the second day, Archon Thiessen made what he thought was a brilliant decision. He ordered his ships to take positions near civilian platforms and space stations. Millions of Velthry civilians lived on these structures. Surely the humans would not risk harming innocents. Admiral Tanaka's response was immediate and unexpected. She split her fleet. Half continued to engage the Velthry warships. The other half began evacuating civilians from the threatened stations, using teleportation technology to beam people directly onto human vessels. She was fighting a battle and conducting a rescue operation at the same time. The Velthry commanders were stunned. They had expected the human advance to slow, to stop, to falter in the face of civilian shields. Instead, the humans simply added another task to their already impossible workload. And somehow, they succeeded at both. By the third day, the Crimson Tide was broken. Hundreds of ships had been destroyed. Hundreds more had surrendered. The survivors retreated toward the homeworld in disarray, leaving behind the civilians they had tried to use as shields. Civilians, who were now safely aboard human ships, Admiral Tanaka broadcast a simple message to the retreating fleet: "We are coming for your Archon. Stand aside, and no more of you need to die." Most of them listened. In his throne room, Archon Thiessen watched the final defense fleet scatter before the human advance. He had one option left, one weapon that could still change everything. He walked to a hidden panel in the wall and entered a code known only to the ruler of the Dominion. A new console rose from the floor. On it was a single button, protected by a glass cover. The Vesser device. A weapon hidden in the heart of the homeworld's sun. Activated, it would trigger a supernova that would destroy not only the Velthry homeworld, but every planet in the system. If he could not rule, no one would survive. He reached for the button. Archon Thiessen's claw hovered over the activation button. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from rage. 12,000 years of Velthry rule, ended by soft-skinned creatures who had been traveling between stars for barely a century. It was unthinkable. It was unbearable. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. Admiral Tanaka's face appeared on his view screen. She looked tired but calm, her eyes carrying that strange human quality he had come to recognize as resolve. "Admiral," the Archon said, "I am prepared to offer you a choice. Withdraw your forces from Velthry space immediately, or I will activate the Vesser device. Your sensors have surely detected the weapon hidden in our sun. You know what it will do? Everyone on this world will die. 20 billion of my own people. But you will not have your victory. You will have nothing but ashes." Admiral Tanaka studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a small, sad smile that the Archon did not understand. "Archon Thiessen," she said quietly, "look outside," hesitated. Then he turned to the great windows of his throne room. What he saw made his blood run cold. Falling through the atmosphere of his world were thousands of objects. At first he thought they were bombs, missiles, weapons of destruction, but as they came closer, he recognized them for what they were: drop pods. Massive drop pods painted in bright colors, carrying not soldiers but supplies, medical equipment, food, emergency shelters, communication devices. "What is this?" he whispered. We have been evacuating your civilians for the past 6 hours, Admiral Tanaka explained. Since you started massing your remaining forces around population centers, we knew you might try something desperate. Our teleportation teams have been working continuously. At this moment, roughly 90% of the civilians on your homeworld have been transported to our ships or to emergency shelters on your moons. The Archon stared at the view screen. That is impossible. Our population is 20 billion. It has been a very busy 6 hours. We have converted every available ship into a temporary transport. We have deployed every shelter we carried. We have even enlisted the help of some of your own former subjects, species who have every reason to hate the Velthari, but who agreed to help save innocent lives anyway.
Ow.
The Archon looked back at the weapon console. The button still glowed beneath its protective cover, but if what the human said was true, activating it would achieve nothing. He would destroy his own world, yes. He would kill himself, and whatever Velthari remained. But the humans would simply leave with 20 billion Velthari refugees aboard their ships. Why? He demanded. Why save them? They are your enemies. Their government tried to destroy you. Their government tried to destroy us, Admiral Tanaka agreed. But governments are not people. Your citizens did not attack Proxima Haven. Your citizens did not order the bombardment. They were born into an empire built on conquest, just like all the other species you have ruled over the centuries. They are victims too, in their own way. We do not want victims. We do not want revenge. We never wanted your extinction, Archon. We wanted your empire to end. We wanted the suffering to stop. And the best way to ensure that future generations do not repeat your mistakes is to show them there is another way. The Archon sank into his throne. His claw fell away from the weapon console. For the first time in his long life, he looked truly defeated. Not because he had lost a war, but because he had lost in a way he could not comprehend. You have taken everything from me, he said. You have taken nothing that was truly yours, Admiral Tanaka replied. Your empire was built on stolen worlds and enslaved peoples. Your wealth came from the suffering of others. Your power was fear. We have not taken anything from you. We have simply returned what you stole. She paused. Her expression softened slightly. You will face justice, Archon. Not human justice. We will hand you over to a council of all the species your empire has wronged. They will decide your fate, but we will ensure that the process is fair. You will have the chance to speak in your own defense. That is more than you gave to the civilizations you destroyed. The Archon laughed bitterly. Mercy, you speak of mercy. Do you truly believe that makes you better than me? I do not know if it makes us better, Admiral, Tanaka said honestly. But it makes us who we are. Humans have spent our entire history learning from our mistakes. We have committed terrible acts against each other. We have waged wars, enslaved our own kind, destroyed our own world. But we have also learned. We have grown. We have chosen, again and again, to reach for something better. When we found your first fleet at Proxima Haven, we could have destroyed them. Instead, we captured them alive. Every soldier is safe, being treated humanely. When we fought your armada, we evacuated civilians even as we battled your warships. And now, at the moment of our victory, we are saving your own people from the weapon you built to destroy them. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes holding his. We do not want to rule your empire, Archon. We do not want to replace one tyrant with another. We want to build something new. A galaxy where no species dominates another, where trade replaces conquest, where cooperation replaces subjugation. And we believe, truly believe, that even the Velthari can be part of that future. If they choose to be, the Archon said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Human soldiers entered the throne room shortly afterward. They did not storm in with weapons raised. They walked in calmly, almost respectfully. The Archon was taken into custody without violence. His reign ended not with fire and blood, but with a quiet surrender in an empty throne room. 10 years later, Kelva stood in a human university on Earth. The old historian had aged well under human care. His scales had regained some of their color, and he walked without his staff now. Medical technology humanity had developed to heal their own wounded had worked wonders on. Fel-3 physiology as well. He was teaching a class. The room was filled with students of a dozen different species, including several young Vel-3. They sat together without hostility, sharing notes and asking questions with genuine curiosity. A human student raised her hand. Professor, the precursor texts warned about humanity. They described our species as dangerous. But you have lived among us for 10 years now. Do you still believe those warnings were accurate? Kelvis considered the question carefully. He thought about the war. He thought about the Archon's defeat. He thought about the years since, watching humans work alongside former enemies to rebuild what had been destroyed. The precursors were wise, he said finally. Their warnings were not wrong. Humanity is dangerous, but I believe they misunderstood the nature of that danger. He walked to the window and looked out at the city beyond. Human children played in parks alongside Vel-3 children. Ships bearing humanitarian symbols launched toward distant worlds. The precursors feared human wrath. They feared human persistence and spite. They believed humanity would destroy any enemy that challenged them. He smiled softly. They were wrong. Humanity's true danger is not their capacity for destruction. It is their capacity for change. The Dominion could have survived your anger. We could have rebuilt after your vengeance. But we could not survive your mercy. Your compassion showed us who we really were. It held a mirror to our civilization and forced us to see the ugliness we had ignored for 12,000 years. That is why the precursors should have warned us. Not because humanity would destroy us, but because humanity would save us from ourselves. And somehow, that is far more terrifying. Because there is no defense against kindness. There is no weapon that can defeat compassion. The only response to mercy is to become worthy of it. Outside the window, former Vel-3 warships, now painted in the colors of the interstellar humanitarian fleet, departed toward the stars. They carried aid to forgotten worlds, medicine to dying populations, hope to species that had never known it. The empire that had turned civilizations to ash had itself been transformed, not through conquest, not through destruction, but through the simple, impossible, terrifying power of a species that refused to become the monsters they fought. Humanity had not defeated the Dominion. They had simply made tyranny obsolete, and that was the most human victory of all.